there seems to be a lot of evidence and a lot of discussion and a mountain, if you will, of backing to state that the public is not really being told about what's going on the moon.
Yeah.
And the question becomes, why is that the case? A document released by WikiLeaks actually indicates that there is a US base on the moon that was once destroyed, allegedly, by the Soviets, ultimately, is what this document talks about. And what's interesting about this document and the supporting evidence that we're going to go through is that it starts to bring more credibility and more credence to the ideas that the moon is a little bit more populated and well understood than is often admitted or talked about in the mainstream. So let's first start, let's get right into this document. Where does it come from? Mm-hmm. And what does it ultimately say?
Well, it comes straight from WikiLeaks, and it's titled "Report that the UR, Soviet Union, destroyed secret U.S. base on moon," and the document is from 1979.
Right.
So you can't view the entire document because they just don't have it. We'd have to file a Freedom of Information request. But the title, it's basically a report that the Soviet Union destroyed a U.S. base on the moon. So this tells us that, based on this document, this WikiLeaks document, that there was a U.S. base built on the moon, and the Soviets destroyed it.
Right, or at least that was a speculation. Sometimes people they'll bring up ideas that within intelligence communities there's counterintelligence, right? And so they will put forth the objection that this could just be a counterintelligence document, so that anybody snooping around could find something, and maybe they would believe there's something going on in the moon. But then you got to think, well, what would the agenda be here for this type of counterintelligence? And it becomes difficult to have that discussion, especially as you start getting into some of the other supporting documents. Like you came across a document prior to it.
Yeah, I mean, this document, WikiLeaks one, is from 1979, but there's a lot of evidence suggesting that there are already bases on the moon, and there were many years ago. And this has been in the talks within government for a long time. For example, there's a congressional record document here from 1966, and Honorable George P. Miller states, "I also believe that we can and will achieve the goal set by Presidents Kennedy and Johnson, a man landing on the moon, before 1970. My own confidence in our rapidly advancing science and technology is such that I can visualize many more dramatic achievements ahead, although I will fix no timetable for them. 1. The exploration of the lunar surface and possibly the establishment of one or more permanent bases there." So you can see that the establishment of a permanent base on the moon it's in the minds of these people, right?
Right.
And that's just one example. Take a look at this screenshot here from a CIA document that we obtained from the electronic reading room. It's a memorandum that was addressed to the CIA director regarding military thought. It's a top secret document, and it's by Lieutenant General Kerensvinsky, if I'm pronouncing that right, a Russian general. And this document's actually from 1962. Mm-hmm. And you can take a look at what this screenshot says here. It's quite telling. Already, interest in the moon is not limited to the study of questions and a discussion of discovered potentialities. Specific projects are being worked out which purpose the construction of various structures under the surface of the moon, from the freight compartments of missiles and also the employment of various versions of pneumatic structures. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and also various American companies, Lockheed Martin and other aerospace companies, are conducting a great deal of work in this direction.
Right.
So, and that's from 1962, so that's before the congressional document.
Right, so you start bringing in the question a little bit here, because there's always been some speculation that some of these corporate entities are receiving funds from the black budget and special access programs that ultimately are not disclosed to the public. And so if they're not disclosed to the public, they are part of the black budget and special access programs. It would also make sense that there would be documentation internally that is shared and passed around to discuss these plans that are just not revealed to the public, which is ultimately what these documents could be.
Yeah, and we've covered the black budget before, there's no doubt, and there's actually a lot of evidence that Catherine Austin Fitts, the former Secretary of Urban Housing and Development in the United States, she recently teamed up with a Michigan State professor and examined where all this trillions of missing dollars from the Pentagon is going. Mm-hmm. And she has referenced the secret space program many times, right? And like just to show you, like, again, how big this moon-based construction stuff is. Here's another document straight from the CIA electronic reading room, keeping tabs on the Soviets and their plans for a base on the moon, right?
Right.
So here it says, the Soviets have additionally stated their intention to establish a lunar base subsequent to manned lunar landing, but no significant details or meaningful timetables have been revealed. If Soviet manned lunar landing is undertaken as a follow-on to extensive Earth orbital operations and instrumented exploration of the moon, it is likely that they will enjoy some advantages in the establishment of a lunar base. So, I mean, this is decades ago, right?
Well, and what's fascinating, just timeline, like, right? We got the timeline. In the 60s, they're talking about the interest of putting bases on the moon and keeping an eye on the Soviets doing so.
Yeah.
Then you're talking about in the late 70s, documents being passed, right? So this is now almost about 10 to 15 years later, you're talking about, oh, well, guess what? The Soviets destroyed one of the US bases on the moon. So it gives plenty of time for these companies to create these bases on the moon, to establish them, and then to have somewhat of a little bit of tension over who is going to be allowed to keep a base there, if you will.
Yeah.
Right, so the timeline fits.
Yeah, and again, like one of the documents said, that these plans are already in the workings. They're already, I believe they suggest they're already in construction in that time.
Right.
So they're very telling documents, and those are just a few examples of many.
And then you get into, so now it's like one of the things that often happens too is people will talk about how there appears to be activity on the moon where, there's been discussion of various, tire tracks or various anomalies that appear to be related to some sort of intelligence, whether they're creating bases, whether they're creating structures or something like that.
There's a lot of evidence we have today that shows like there is something happening on the moon, specifically on the backside of the moon, the part we can never see with a telescope, right? This stuff has been subjected to scientific research because that's how odd they look. For example, there's a study that was published a few years ago in the Journal of Space Exploration that examined certain features on in a crater on the backside of the moon. Mm-hmm. And the title of that study is called "Image Analysis of Unusual Structures on the Far Side of the Moon," and in the crater Periclesis C. It argues that the features might actually be artificial in origin. Right. And obviously it didn't get much attention, but here's an interesting quote from the study regarding the extraterrestrial hypothesis that these might have been made by extraterrestrials. Mm-hmm. A decidedly conservative mainstream scientific establishment often rejects anomalies based on subject matter alone. There cannot be alien artifacts on the moon because there are no alien artifacts on the moon or other planets. Such a view is an example of circular reasoning based on the belief that extraterrestrials do not exist, or if they do exist, that they could not have traveled to our solar system. Right. So basically, leave out the extraterrestrial part for now because we have evidence that there are also manned bases on the moon built by us. They're basically saying that subject matter alone is enough to deny a phenomenon, no matter how much evidence there is. Right. So, this paper found what looked like underground passageways, large structures on the moon, and this is a mainstream scientific study, and it corroborates with a lot of other information. Army remote viewers, for example, like Ingo Swann in his book Penetration, saw what he thought were towers on the moon, bases, structures, man as well as extraterrestrials on the moon together doing something. Mm-hmm. And that matches corroboration from other people. I mean, to go into Ingo Swann a little bit further, you're essentially having scientific research done on remote viewers, and this was done in which university again? Stanford University in conjunction with the CIA. Right. So that whole program was designed to apply scientific rigor to the phenomenon, if you will, of remote viewing. So seeing places that you currently cannot see from a distant location and trying to, display or, show some accuracy that, hey, what this person is observing is actually in that location based on a coordinate. And the scientific rigor on that suggests that, yes, these remote viewers are highly trained and are accurately indicating what is in those locations. Yeah. And so to have Ingo Swann, which was one of the most decorated and celebrated remote viewers, to have him be able to say these sorts of things, and then you look at the corroboration of other whistleblowers who
may not be providing evidence at this point,
Yeah.
you start to put together a picture of a story, which is ultimately what this discussion is about. Is there seems to be a lot of evidence and a lot of discussion and a mountain, if you will, of backing to state that the public is not really being told about what's going on the moon.
Yeah.
And the question becomes, why is that the case? When you start exploring some truths, you start to be able to reframe our reality and create from that new reframed state of being, from that new mindset versus just the very limited frame of what is reality and what we should be doing here to just uphold everyday life. We're capable of more than that, and that's ultimately what this is about.